Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and welcome to Way of the Underhive, your ultimate guide to Games Workshop's gritty and immersive skirmish game Necromunda. So whether you're brand new to the dark depths of Hive Primus or a veteran looking to sharpen your skills, this series is your go-to resource for mastering all aspects of the game. From gang warfare to campaign strategies, we've got you covered. And on today's video, we're going to talk about a very specific topic about Necromunda rules that's been kind of making the way in my comments sections on my channel. The problem that we're running into is a lot of players out there running into a difficulty with defining what a specialist is in gang compositions when it creates their fighters. And that's actually a very easy mistake to make because unfortunately, Games Workshop kind of dropped the ball a little bit when it came to what defining a specialist for a gang. That's why the Necromunda title slide says, is a specialist or is a specialist? Because a lot of people get those terms kind of confused, and it's not the player's fault that they're making this mistake. It really isn't. It's really at the feet of Games Workshop because for whatever XYZ reasons, they didn't take the time to actually clarify things before they actually publish their publications, especially when it comes to later editions of books that are coming out, especially for gang compositions. Specifically Vansar gangs, for example, running into this issue, and same thing with Ashwaste nomads. So the whole purpose of this video is to answer that question: what makes a specialist? Alright, so right off the bat, here's the real question: is a specialist or is a specialist a specialist? Alright, it may seem kind of ridiculous to say that, but the reason why this is becoming a huge problem for a lot of players, especially when they're founding the gangs, is that we have two types of fighters that are labeled as specialists, and this is causing a lot of confusion for a lot of players going in. In fact, I've actually been seeing this in a lot of my Way of the Underhive videos where I've made gangs including both types of specialists, and players are asking me, wait a minute, I thought you could only have one specialist type in your gang. That answer is both yes and no, because it kind of depends on the type of specialist you're referring to. There are two types of specialists in a gang when you found it. You have a promoted specialist, where basically you're taking a ganger level fighter and you're promoting them to the rank of specialist. And then you have a new type of gang fighter called a specialist. And this is where we get the two different rules mixed up. And this is where I'm going to try to clarify this rule a little bit better to help players understand exactly what the differences is. And if you are confused about this, do not feel bad at all. You're not the only one. In fact, I had to reread these rules a couple of times myself when these new types of fighters came out to make sure I wasn't making a mistake. Games Workshop really needs to sharpen their quality control on their products before they're releasing rule sets to avoid issues like this in the future. So let's go and talk about exactly what these two types are. I'm going to use Ashwaste nomads as a perfect example of where the confusion is coming in. Alright, so let's take a look at this little excerpt here. I took a screenshot of an Ashwaste Nomad Specialist. This is a ganger level fighter that was promoted to a specialist rank. And this is where it says, promotion, Ashwaste Nomad Specialist. When the gang is founded, a single Ashwaste Nomad's warrior can be promoted to become an Ashwaste Nomad Specialist. Note, they may not be upgraded to become an Ashwaste Nomad's Hunter. During campaign play, additional Ashwaste Nomad warriors may become Ashwaste Nomad specialists by spending experience points as described in the campaign rules. An Ashwaste Nomad specialist gains the tools of the trade special rule, may purchase special and heavy weapons, and may spend experience points to gain additional skills. So let's go and break down this rule and exactly what it implies. The first sentence reads, when a gang is founded, a single Ashwaste Nomad's warrior can be promoted to become an Ashwaste Nomad Specialist. Note, they may not be upgraded to become an Ashwaste Nomad's Hunter. Now what this tells me is that the Ashwaste Nomad Warrior and the Ashwaste Nomad Shadar Hunter are two different types of fighters. So if you were to promote a Ashwaste Nomad Warrior, they can't become a Shadar Hunter. They're just a Warrior Specialist, okay? And that's the very first thing that represents. That means that Shadar Hunter Specialists and Warriors who are promoted to the rank of Specialists are two very different things. The second sentence reads, during campaign play, additional Ashwaste Nomad warriors may become Ashwaste Nomad specialists by spending experience points as described in the campaign rules. See the Necromunda core rules. Now what that happens is that whenever you get 6 experience points for a gang fighter, they actually roll 2d6 on a table to determine what kind of upgrades they get for their character whenever they spend experience points. And one of them is called promoted to a specialist. That's where you get this Ash Waste Nomad Warrior Specialist rank from. At that point, which brings us to the next third sentence here, an Ash Waste Nomad Specialist gains the tools to trade special rule, may purchase special and heavy weapons, and may spend experience points to gain additional skills. What that means now is that this fighter can now take special weapons as well as heavy weapons on their trading post. At the same time, they can also, instead of having to roll randomly every 6 experience points, they can spend their experience points to purchase specific upgrades like leaders, champions, as well as juvies can, and as well as prospects. Okay, and that's the first type of specialist. So when you're creating a gang and you have a warrior, let's say you want this Ash Waste warrior to carry a web gun, for example, which is a special weapon, you can promote this person to a specialist. They can purchase that web gun. You can only have one of these type of fighters in your gang. That is the first type of specialist that's available to gangs with this situation. Alright, so now that we're done talking about the first type of specialist, let's talk about the second type. Specifically, this is a screenshot from the rulebook for Shadar Hunters. The special rule says Gang Fighter Specialist. Now this is where the confusion comes in. It reads, fighters with this special rule form the backbone of Ash Waste Nomad gangs. The total number of fighters with a Gang Fighter X special rule in the game must always be equal to or higher than the total number of fighters without the Gang Fighter X special rule combined, not counting hanger-ons or hired guns. Alright, so what does that basically mean? It means that this type of fighter is called a specialist, but you can recruit as many of these fighters as you want in a gang so long as the number of fighters kind of exceeds fighters without this rank. So for example, if you have a leader as well as 2 champions, you must have at least 3 fighters with a Gang Fighter X special rule attached to it. This could be any combination of Ash Waste Warriors, it could be your Dust Runners, it could be your Prospects with the Dustback Helamites, it could be your Shadar Hunters. So long as it outnumbers the fighters of the X fighter without that Gang Fighter X rule, that's how it counts. So what this basically means is if you want to, you could have an Ash Waste Nomad leader as a chieftain, as well as 2 champions in your gang, and then you have 3 Shadar Hunters if you want to balance it out, and it still work. Because remember, we're not counting hanger-ons or hired guns. They're not included in this. Brutes are included in this, but that's a totally different situation. That's a totally different rule set. We'll talk about that later. So this is the second type of fighter where you can have as many of these guys as you want to, because technically speaking, they are Gang Fighter X type fighters, alright? It's just that their title is called Specialist. And this is where Games Workshop really made a huge mistake, because they kind of used the same term for 2 different types of fighters and just kind of expected us to figure it out. And that's where the major confusion coming in. So once again, the first type is one fighter that you promote to that rank, and you can only have one at the start of a campaign, unless of course other warriors, other gangers, earn experience points and roll that upgrade. And then you have the second type, which is a Gang Fighter X type that can be purchased multiple times within your gang. So once again, to reiterate the rules breakdown, only one fighter can be promoted to the rank of Specialist at the creation of your gang, and that's usually a ganger level fighter, things like Cotter Brethren, for example, or a Redemptionist Brethren, a gunner for the Orlocks, a tech for the Van Sar, an Ash Waste Nomad Warrior, for example. These are guys that can be promoted to a specialist at creation. Now the second type of specialist, for example, like Van Sar Techs and Van Sar and Ash Waste Nomad Shadar Hunters, you can purchase as many of those guys as you want for your gang because they have the Gang Fighter X special rule attached to them. I know the confusion comes into play because they have the exact same title, which is a huge issue, but that's basically how the rules breaks down. So if you ever see someone who brings multiple Shadar Hunters in an Ash Waste Nomad gang, they're allowed to do so because they are not actually the promoted type of specialist, they're the Gang Fighter X type of specialist. To further reiterate this, let's use this as an example, alright? So once again, let's pretend we're going back with our Ash Waste Nomad Warriors, alright? So we want a warrior to carry a web gun, but the problem is, of course, that they can't take special weapons unless they're a specialist. So we can promote one of our warriors to a specialist, and they can buy that web gun for themselves. However, we can have any number of Shadar Hunters that we want in our gang as well. Alright, and that's where the major difference comes into with these 2 examples. The same rule would also apply to Van Sar Techs as well. For example, if you have a Biotech, which is a specialist with a Gang Fighter X special rule, you can take as many Biotechs, Gun Techs as you want to for your Vox Techs. You can take as many as you want to as well. But you can only promote one Tech, just the normal name, Tech by itself, as a specialist. And if it's a mistake that you made in the past, it's perfectly fine because it's a very easy mistake to make. And the reason why this whole situation is broken up in the first place is because for whatever reason, Games Workshop's writers for Necromunda were too lazy to come up with a new type of fighter categorization or category of fighter for their gangs, which is causing all this confusion in the first place. Alright, they decided to call a new type of fighter a specialist even though they had a rank called a specialist in a gang as well. I'm not sure why they thought this would be a really good idea to do so. I mean, you could change the name to something really simple like an elite. Alright, elite fighters. You know, these are like Shadar hunters. They're considered the elite fighters of your gang. A biotech is an elite fighter in your gang. Or you could call them Vanguard, for example, right? For example, Shadar hunters are Vanguard fighters. You can have as many Vanguard fighters as you want, or you can have as many gun techs and gun techs as you want for a Vansar game because they're a Vanguard, right? And here's the crazy part: I don't even get paid to do these rules writing, and I just made up 2 new titles right off the bat just for this video. But I guess for whatever XYZ reasons, using names like Elites or Vanguard was way too difficult and confusing for the rules writers to actually come up with. So in conclusion, Games Workshop really needs to sharpen up their quality control to avoid future problems like this in the future. I mean, after all, we just talked about one of the big reveals that they had for the preview show. They forgot an entire special character from one of the Warhammer 40k codexes. I mean, how do you forget the codex, the rule entry for a special character for a codex, right? How do you not have different names for fighters? I mean, you're a multi-million dollar company that's charging outrageous prices for your products, and you can't, make sure that your rules make sense. That's a little weird, all right? So Games Workshop, you guys need to get a little more creative in the naming of your fighters for your different types of fighters in a Necromunda gang so you don't have these kind of mistakes in the future, alright? And like I said before, this is a very easy mistake to make as a player in Necromunda because it's not really your issue. It's the rule writers' issues who are not doing their job to making sure that this is not a problem in the future. If it becomes too much of an issue for you, may I suggest that as an arbitrator you refer to these type of fighters not as specialists but as elites or vanguards. That way it alleviates a lot of confusion for your fighters. So for example, if you wanted to, someone's playing an Ashways Nomad gang, you could say like, yeah, we're just going to call your Shadar Hunter an elite because using the name specialist is too confusing about the already established specialist rules from when Games Workshop first released Necromunda, as an example. And that would be something I would suggest for you as arbitrators to do with your players as well. And of course, players, if you always have questions about fighter characteristics and game compositions, always refer to your arbitrator. Your arbitrator, after all, is the final say in the campaign, and you can never go wrong with asking them these questions and getting clarity on rules for their campaigns as well. And as a recommendation, if you guys have any other more questions about Necromunda rules that are causing some confusions, put them down in the comments box down below. I'd really like to hear some of your guys' ideas about some of the things that you might be running into, and if I'm able to answer them, I'll be more than happy to do so, make a short little video about it. So there you guys go. This is a little video about trying to clarify some of the rules designation about specialist fighters as well as specialist ranked fighters inside of a gang. Hopefully this kind of cleared up a lot of the confusion that you might have. If you guys have any questions, please let me know down below and I'll try to clarify a little bit more in case I did a bad job in this video. That's good for this one, you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. I will catch you guys on the next video. I am Commander Cheapskate. Stay classy, y'all. Peace out.